Comrades, sisters and brothers, first let me add my voice to welcoming our Cuban comrades. I think you know, I hope you know how important it is for us to have you here. And of course, the bus drivers, wow. As I was listening to Comrade Fred's talk, I was thinking about the bus drivers. I'd really like to, if I can, sort of take off from where Fred left about the development of a new workers' movement. It's incipient. It has a long way to go. But comrades and friends, it's an undeniable development. And this is a new workers' movement. It's global, and it has revolutionary potential from the point of view of politics and ideology. It's not guaranteed. I happen to think that what we do, along with many others, may make a difference. I'll give you a reason, if you don't have enough, to make sure that Veolia fails to bust this great union in Boston. And that these courageous union leaders who have been fired are forced to reinstate them. The sooner the better. It's this reason. This local, 8751, is rare. I think it's in the company of maybe a handful of locals. I think of Local 10 of ILWU in San Francisco that helped to launch the Million Worker March movement. I think of Black Workers for Justice and UE Local 150, which the lessons that they could teach the leadership of the larger unions about social unionism, about being in the community, about the solidarity that they have with people outside the labor movement that helps make them unbreakable in the racist, so-called right to work, union-busting South. This union in Boston is like that. It's quite rare how it hasn't come under terrible attack as of yet. In some ways, is a miracle. Of course, they'll tell you they're always under attack. The bourgeoisie wants to get rid of locals like 8751 because they're revolutionary. They're militant. They never roll over. They're the perfect model of what militant revolutionary trade unionism is. We have a right to fight for our rights, and you can't stop us. If you don't like it, it's not part of your program or the mayor's program, well, the hell with you. This is why they want to break this union. We can't let them break this union because this union is a bridge. It's a bridge from what you might call traditional unionism as it has been practiced for a long time to this new, potentially more revolutionary workers' movement. These sisters, these comrades and friends, yes, I call them my comrades in Local 8751, they have important things to share with the young workers in McDonald's or in one of the big box retailers like Walmart's or the cooks and the bus employees who make minimum wage or less. They have experiences and courage and revolutionary ideas to share with this new movement that this new movement will need and find very valuable. It's one of the bridges. Not all unions are bridges. Some of them, most of them, will learn more from the new movement. That's why they need the new movement. It's ironic that at the same time that most of the trade unionists that we know whether you work for the post office or whether you work in government or a teacher or the transportation, especially if it hasn't been privatized already. You're struggling with government at every level against austerity, against your school being closed, against the post office being closed, against some service being shut down, and hundreds, if not thousands, of workers being fired. In everywhere, north, south, left, right, every region of the world. That's what's happening now. At the same time that we're battling austerity, a desperate and defensive struggle, there's also this other struggle that's bubbling up. And even though it's very desperate workers who are in the forefront of it, it is an offensive struggle. Even if it's just a demand of 50 cents or $1 more wage, or the right to have a union in some little restaurant or in some chain restaurant. These are some of the pillars of this new movement. Fred talked about the economic and social basis for this movement being in the development of capitalism, particularly capitalist overproduction, which is exacerbated by technology, and also more and more labor on a global scale being organized globally. If only our class knew that, and the sooner they know the better, but they're learning that if the enemy is organizing on a global basis, how can we do any less? How can we do any less? And what happens if we don't learn that? We better learn it, and the sooner the better. This movement has the potential. I say this earnestly, meaning it's not just rhetoric because I'm up here and I want to say something nice so people will be happy. Nothing wrong with that. But this is deeper than that. This new workers' movement has the potential to shoot ahead light years politically and ideologically. What do I mean by ideologically? What did Marx say in the quote that if you read what was in the paper, you see it there, and I've used it before. He said, apart from, speaking about labor, apart from its original purposes, what was the labor movement's original purposes, more or less? To fight with some boss and try to force that boss to give the workers a greater share of the wealth that they produce so they can go back to work and with some normalcy and feed their families. What Marx is saying that we reach a time, and we're at that time. He didn't live to see it, but he might as well because he describes it better than almost anyone. We're living in a time where this goal, this objective, fighting with the boss, getting a contract, getting some concessions, it's still wonderful. We still must fight for it. But the development of capitalism has developed far beyond that, and it's become more difficult. So what do? Do you give up? No, you do the opposite. You change your goals. You hold on to the goal of winning union recognition wherever you can, of winning the concessions wherever you can. But you have to add other goals, like organizing our whole class on a class-wide basis, whether it's employed, unemployed, underemployed, especially the most oppressed, especially the most exploited, getting them into the movement. And what becomes your objective in the long run? Not just a contract, very important, but the complete emancipation of the working class. Now, the last time I looked, emancipation is not just a contract. Emancipation is freedom from capitalist exploitation and oppression. There was an understanding that at some point, capitalism would be so dysfunctional, so violently in crisis, that it would become clear that this system was no longer able, under any circumstances, to provide what people need, their social needs. And so that it would have to be replaced with another system that was genuinely social, like socialism. You know, this movement is actually coming together in front of our eyes. It's uneven, but it should be clear. It's been developing for maybe 10 years, maybe a little less. One of our problems is that workers usually are behind the economic developments, but ultimately they catch up. I would say that this movement started in a real way in this country with the rebellion of migrant workers in 2006. Migrant workers were the key to this rebellion, and this is not just a U.S. phenomenon. As Sister Teresa said, it's a global phenomenon. Migrant workers are at the cutting edge of this new workers' movement. And then we saw Occupy Wall Street, and now we're seeing the low-wage workers in a number of industries. Fast food, big box retailers, but more and more other industries. I so agree with Fred. There are tens of millions of low-wage workers. It's not some small thing. Walmart has more than 2 million alone. McDonald's has another 2 million. And you add up all the fast food chains, it's something like 3 or 4 million. And you don't even consider the retailers, Costco and Target. But what about the low-wage workers who are in offices, who are in restaurants, who are trapped in hot kitchens, who don't get off work until 1 a.m. in the morning, who work 2 shifts, or janitors, or security guards, or all the place, hotels, cleaning people's shit, in hospitals. It's tens of millions of workers that are waking up. What are some of the features of this movement? It's migrant, it's women largely, it's black and brown, it's multicultural, multilingual. Some of them have their own organizations that are not traditional unions. I think they call them alternative workers organizations. I don't like it because it sounds like a put down, because you're not in an official union, or the workers who you are representing don't have a contractual agreement. They're not recognized. These are important workers' organizations, whether it's for the day laborers, or for the domestic workers, or for the taxi drivers, go on and on and on. These are important workers' organizations. And in every way, I think we should argue with anyone who's confused about this, that these organizations are just as important as your traditional union with a contract and so forth. There's a lot of debate in the movement about this. A lot of debate. Well, that's not serious. They can't pay dues. They can't sustain office. They can't hire staff. Well, that's what the bigger, more traditional unions have to do. Give them the resources and don't try to dictate to them either. This new workers' movement is more a movement than trade unionism. It's more of a movement, and I mean that in this way. The trade union movement has been static. It's been, in many ways, it's a feeling that it's not growing, it's shrinking, its culture is not changing. That's going to change. That's going to change. I mean, a sign of it is the Afl-Cio Convention. We've talked about it, we debated it in the party, but we must give them some recognition. Last night, I went on their convention page, and I read all of the resolutions. And almost every other resolution says we've got to be inclusive. We got to include, we got to include, we got to include. What they do about it, we don't know. But I think that somebody over there at least has read a little bit of Marx about talking about how we've got to bring in more workers, how we've got to try to represent the unemployed. I'd like to send them a telegram, and maybe we will, maybe it won't be in the form of a telegram, telling them, you know, if you don't reach out to larger sections of our class that doesn't happen to be in unions, like young people, young unemployed people, who see jails more than they see jobs, who have no future, and who capitalism will pit against you. When you're fighting to hold on to your pension, when you're in a union-busting situation, and they tell the young people who have no jobs and no future, why should you be for them? Where's your pension? You know, and they do this. More and more they do this. As poverty deepens on a global basis, to the extent that they can get away with it, capital will try to pit worker against worker. Our question is, why doesn't the Afl-Cio help organize a massive jobs march? You can find leaders, militant leaders, visionary leaders amongst the young people. They're everywhere. They don't need the leadership. What they need is some buses. We'll help. There are many more who will help. And you know what this would do? Maybe, in some small but significant way, all of those young people who march wherever they march for jobs, they'll look at the labor movement differently. Another thing that distinguishes this new movement as opposed to just a sort of static organization is the potential for ideological transformation and militant tactics. You know, the low-wage workers in fast food have attempted several strikes. First on a local basis about a year ago, and at the end of the summer, they tried a big strike for them, a nationwide strike. I think it hit 60 cities. Some comrades may know this more than I do. Tens of thousands of workers were involved. National strike. And I know that there are some who say, well, I don't know why they call it a strike. That's not serious. At best, the fast food workers probably took out 0.5%. You know, there are tens of millions of fast food workers. And even if 10,000 of them participated, you know, really, it's a very, very small percentage. However, they raised hell. They got attention paid to them. And you know what they did too? They gave us an example of what our migrant sisters and brothers did in 2006. They held a political strike. Political strike. All strikes are good, especially the ones you can win and the ones you're not forced into. But this strike for the right to a union and for a $15 minimum wage, and it was a strike against the employers. It was a strike against government at every level. It was a strike against Congress. It was a national political strike. You don't see that every day in this country. We need more political strikes. We need more political strikes. And you don't have to bring out 50% of the working class or even 10%. 5% would look incredible. 8 to 10% would be off the wall, off the roof. It would be incredible. It would scare the hell out of the capitalist bourgeoisie. Imagine if instead of having a few demonstrations, which probably were good, we called the strike, our class called a strike to demand single payer. Yeah. Single payer health care. Yeah. Then the whole context of Obamacare would be we'd be discussing it in a completely different way, in a positive way. And what I think the immigrant workers and what some of these young low-wage workers, not all of them are young, but most of them are. Most of them are. They are the ones that are illuminating the path to a general strike in this country. It doesn't have to be everybody. It's uneven. But there'll come a time when this new movement will be able to do that. Sisters and brothers, I want to talk about the future and our role. Let's face it. As a revolutionary communist organization, we have opponents in the working class movement. We call them social democrats, which more often these days mean that they see the Democratic Party as the beginning and end of everything. There are other things that you could use to characterize them. They're in this movement. They're in this movement. And they have political influence. But this movement has the potential to transcend their limitations politically and ideologically. However, they need us and people like us. They need revolutionaries who have nothing invested in the pillars of capitalist exploitation and oppression. And that's the government, and that's the city councils, and that's Congress, and that's state legislatures. I mean, we're not ultra-leftists. We'll deal with them. We deal with politicians. We ask them to speak at rallies if it helps. You know, we sign petitions and so forth like that. We don't have some strange, impractical, principled position that, you know, puts us outside the working class the way it is, not the way we want it. But at the same time, we're not vested in the superstructure of capitalism. In these governments and presidents and mayors, you know, who are pillars of capitalism and who are there if we don't already know that they're coming after us to deceive us. There's an interesting situation going on in New York. If I had more time, I'd explain it. But a lot of people think there was a revolution at the elections in New York because, you know, in relative terms, a very progressive candidate was elected. The good thing about it is everywhere I go in the movement, I hear people saying, well, what is he going to do now? Is he going to expand housing, low-cost housing? Is he going to expand health care? And I think, even more than Obama, he may have created expectations that will be so we'll see how that plays out. New York is going to be a very interesting place to be having a struggle here. But our job, and I think the job of the assembly movement and the job of the workers' assemblies is to deliberately create not just a left pole, a revolutionary pole inside this new workers' movement as a bulwark, as a check on the movement being completely controlled by those who are leading it into the Democratic Party. It's a big challenge for us. It's not going to be easy. It'll take work. But the beginning of that work is getting into that movement and down in the trenches. One of the great things about this movement, Fred alluded to it, is that unlike some workers, the circumstances of these low-wage workers are so social. They're so in the community. I mean, if you talk about the fast food stores, they're everywhere. They're across the street from each other, the same chain. They're in the community. They're downtown. They're by school. There are thousands of them. And if it's not this one, it's another chain store. Same thing with the retail box stores. The workers go to these stores. We all know them. Think about it. Imagine how easy it is for a mass movement that's supporting these workers' rights to organize and get $15 an hour. How easy it would be for us to support them. How easy it would be if their goal was to shut all these stores down. They're right with us. It's actually one of the contradictory social dynamics, because for so long, the capitalist offensive on a globalized basis has been atomizing workers. But I think Fred got it right on the head when he says, for a lot of these low-wage workers, it's pulling them together and making them more accessible and making it a hell of a lot easier for us to support them. And also making it inevitable that whatever their struggle is, it will affect millions of people who are not working at these stores or retail stores. Because how will you be able to avoid this struggle? It'll be all over the place. In a few days, about 3 weeks, I think, the low-wage workers, and I think it's both in the fast food chains as well as Walmart's. I think they're doing this together, and maybe a few other places. They're planning a repeat of what they did on August 29th, another nationwide strike for $15 an hour and a union. There are a couple of things that are leading up to that. On what's called Black Friday, the day after, the racist holiday, some of us will be going, where. But it's a big shopping day. So some Walmarts are being shut down by the workers, and so that's sort of like the first step toward it. But December 5th is supposed to be the big day. That's supposed to be the big day for a nationwide strike of low-wage workers. At our last Assembly Movement meeting in New York, we had a very serious discussion about this. And what we decided, and will try to do, and I hope it reverberates on a national basis, wherever possible, we are going to organize serious strike support for this effort. We don't know what that means. We don't know whether it means occupying stores with the workers. We don't know whether it means doing this or doing that, or going into stores and, doing mic checks, or having other, workers, march from point A to point B where we all meet together, or something that you can't even talk about, in a meeting like this. But we are going to sit down and put our head together, and we are going to come up not just with a way to support this strike, but a meaningful way. And it's just one step. We've got to do this, sisters and brothers. That was our feeling coming out of that meeting. Because these brave workers are throwing down. They could get fired. They are getting fired. And sometimes they're struggling back and getting rehired. It's an intriguing and fluid dynamic. Also, the Saturday before December 5th, which is November 30th, in our office on 24th Street, we are going to convene a Solidarity with Low-Wage Workers Assembly right here in New York. And the purpose of that assembly will be to organize support for December 5th, organize strike support. And I don't know what we're going to get. Maybe it's, not wise or premature to promise. But I'll tell you, we're going to try to get an awful lot of activists from OWS, from the struggle against stop and frisk and police terror, from other progressive organizations. We're going to try to get hundreds of people together to sit down and figure out how they can support this courageous strike of low-wage workers in New York. And I hope you take this back and try to do it yourself. If we're in there and we are able to erect this revolutionary pole, it will help workers everywhere, no matter what their circumstances are. Workers of the world unite.